Our speaker today received her BS in chemistry from Bradley University in 2007 and her PhD in chemistry at Washington University in St. Louis in 2013. She's currently the Vice President of Market Development at Cofactor Genomics, an RNA diagnostics company working to bridge the precision medicine gap. She relocated from St. Louis to Boston in the fall of 2019 to open Cofactor's newest office in Kendall Square. Her current service to ACS includes career consultant, membership on BNF, chair of the Diversity, Inclusion, Respect Advisory Board, member at large of the Division of Professional Relations, alternate counselor for the Northeastern Local Section, and for the Division of Business Development and Management. As a younger chemist with a non-academic career path, Natalie is passionate about helping the ACS evolve to reflect the changing face of chemistry and creating a more inclusive environment where all feel welcome. Introducing our speaker, Natalie LaFranzo.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Ori, for the kind introduction. I think, as Ori mentioned, we'll keep cameras off until we get to the interactive activities, and then I'll give you the signal to go ahead and turn those cameras back on and be prepared to unmute if you feel comfortable joining the discussion. So we do have 3 interactive activities today. So first of all, I just want to welcome you to this space. Hopefully it's been a great day so far. You've been participating in some sessions, or maybe you're just joining us from work. I'm hoping you can kind of take a deep breath and be grateful for the opportunity to be here. I'm very appreciative that you're here and joining us and working to create a more equitable and safe space in chemistry. My name is Natalie LaFranzo. You've heard a little bit about me. I will be your host for the next 40 minutes or so. And I do want to start with the disclaimer that while I'm here, I'm passionate about creating a more inclusive space in chemistry. Most of my knowledge is from lived experience and from reading and listening. And so the topic that we're going to be talking about today has been written on by people with a variety of identities, people of color, queer identifying people, differently abled people, people from different religious backgrounds. And so I'll reference some of the resources I've used, and I encourage you to, and I will continue to encourage you throughout the presentation to find resources and continue to read from experiences that different people have had. I will share some specific links at the end of the presentation, as well as my slide deck, if I can remember to paste that in the chat. I hope that this is really the start of a conversation, and that in our short time together, you'll be introduced to some topics and some resources, but that you'll want to continue your journey and learn more about this work and some of the fantastic experts that we'll hear more about today. So I know that it's important to help communicate expectations for our time spent together. So here's a brief summary of what I hope we'll accomplish today. I'll first introduce myself, and I'll be brief about that since we've just gotten a great introduction. And I'll also share some more about the work the American Chemical Society is doing to embrace and advance inclusion in chemistry. We'll walk through a couple of definitions to help center our discussion around allyship, and this will hopefully lead into 3 interactive activities before we wrap up. I'm optimistic that we'll have time for all 3 of those, but I will prioritize making space for those over having time for discussion at the end. And then if we need to bleed into the break period to continue any of the discussion, we'll do that. As I mentioned, I'm happy to share this slide deck. Let me see if I can go ahead and paste it in the chat right now so you have access to it. If someone could click that link and make sure it works at some point today before we sign off, that would be great. Again, I hope that you'll see this as a starting point and that you'll take the information that we talk about today to move this DEIR, diversity, equity, inclusion, respect work into any other organizations that you belong to, and especially if you're a part of the American Chemical Society, any of the units that you support within ACS. I think it's going to feel like a really short time and we're going to go really quickly. And so I just want to acknowledge that that is with some intentionality to share as much information as possible. And I want you to know that I'm happy to be a resource as you continue these conversations after today. So feel free to lean on me. I'll share my contact information again at the end. And so let me know how I can help you. All right, and with that, let's go ahead and jump in. So first, who am I? Why am I talking here today. So you heard a little bit about my background and my career path thus far, so I won't spend too much time on that. Maybe a few things that weren't shared. I'm originally from the Midwest. I really lived my entire life. You did hear that I moved out to the Boston area very recently. You did also hear that I'm particularly passionate about helping younger scientists navigate non-academic career paths. That doesn't mean that I don't appreciate the academic career path, but I feel like there's an awful lot of information shared for folks who want to follow that career path. And so I'm happy to be a resource in that area. Both my degrees are in chemistry, but I've been operating at the interface of biology and chemistry since graduate school. On a more personal note, I was a cheerleader in college and a cheerleading coach for over a decade before I moved out here to Boston. I also enjoy reading, working out in Orange Theory, and spending time with my family, which includes 2 miniature dachshunds, Frank and Beans. So that's a little bit about me. You heard about my American Chemical Society volunteerism. For me, the focus of ACS is not necessarily on the technical community, but more on the opportunities for leadership and professional development. And so I've served in a number of roles. The primary focus of my time right now is on this Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Respect Advisory Board, which is the reason why I'm here speaking with you today. And so these experiences that I've had have been really critical in my own professional development, and I'm grateful for how it's allowed me to advance in my career. And so one of my personal goals within ACS is to make sure that chemists from all backgrounds have the opportunity to participate in ACS in any way that they choose. And that can be just being a member and sort of leveraging the benefits of ACS. But if you have an interest in rising through governance and want to take on leadership roles, sometimes that can seem very daunting. It can seem very political. And so I would be happy to support you and help navigate that as we continue to try to break down barriers and make that process a little bit easier. And so that's a great place to start talking about the work that ACS is doing in this space. So the society in general has recognized that science has not been an equal or equitable space for everyone. And that, that's not only reflective in the world at large, but even within the American Chemical Society and our processes and procedures. And while diversity and inclusion has been a focus of ACS for decades, it was not a, I think, concerted effort that the entire society had rallied behind in the way that was necessary to make systemic change. And so in late 2020, the board approved the addition of ACS Strategic Goal 5, which is here on your screen. The name is Embrace and Advance Inclusion in Chemistry. This, along with the establishment of the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Respect, represents a broader and more impactful approach to making progress in this space. First and foremost, we talk about creating a welcoming environment and supportive environment for all to engage with ACS, and that includes members, employees, volunteers. But the goal has to extend beyond the American Chemical Society and into the chemistry community at large. And going deeper, as I mentioned, it's about addressing those systemic barriers and the procedural inequities that just continue to perpetuate the marginalization that different parts of our community have had to experience. So I encourage you to check out strategy.acs.org and read more of the full goal details, because it starts to outline some of the areas where each of our different ACS units can contribute. And as I mentioned, in 2021, the ACS established this Office of DEIR and elevated the leader of this office to a vice president level position, and they report directly to the CEO. So this office is the central hub for DEIR resources within ACS, with the goal of expanding to be a central resource for the entire chemistry community. And so the office and the advisory board that I currently chair closely collaborate to ensure that there's strategic alignment on DEIR throughout the ACS, both on the staff, the members, and the volunteer leader fronts. But the reality is that the work of DEIR has to be owned by everyone. And so we encourage all facets of ACS, and we hope eventually the chemistry community to work alongside us to take on activities and initiatives that foster inclusivity. So with that introduction, I would now like to transition into the topic at hand of allyship. And you're all here today because I hope that you're invested in personally stepping up to be an ally in this work. So I think it's important to start, level set defining what an ally is. It took a lot of reading and thought to come up with, I tried to come up with a simplistic definition, but what I realized is that there are lots of different opinions on what an ally is and how an ally should function. So it's very contextual, situation dependent. Each organization, situation, experience that you have may have different power structures. And so, you know, how you operate as an ally can vary depending on the situation that you're in. But I do think it's important to emphasize that you can be an ally at any age or any career stage. And so whether you're an undergraduate student, a graduate student, a faculty member, or a very high leader at an organization, you can practice allyship at any of those levels. So I think, you know, the best place to start on this is to really start on a personal journey, start to unpack and better understand your identity, examples of where you hold privilege. So that's something that I think has to be done on a personal level. And so I encourage you, whether that is, you know, thought process is starting today or it's continuing because you've already been thinking a little bit about this. So start with that personal aspect. But then we should also be aware of who holds the power in specific situations. Consider the structural or systemic inequities that exist and how different identity groups are impacted by those. This could be something formal, like a law that allows transgender people to be fired. It could be barriers for groups of people to participate, voter registration laws, for example. Or it could be something informal, an unspoken rule, for example, that doesn't allow everyone to participate or challenges advancement of certain identity groups. The word privilege came up quite a bit in reading about this, and I know that can be a very charged word. You know, there are lots of definitions of privilege, but I think one that resonates with me is, you know, a special advantage or entitlement that is used to advance one's own benefit, and often it's at the detriment of others. And so thinking about what privileges you hold in addition to your identities is a good place to start. Importantly, if you're interested in being an ally, education is probably the most important facet of this. No one can do that work for you. No one can educate you to understand what other identities are going through. And you should not expect people of other identities to do that work for you or to communicate that to you. Google is your friend. Your favorite bookstore is your friend, whether you choose to support Amazon or a smaller, you know, Black-owned business. I have opinions there, obviously, but wherever you find your information, it is on you, if you choose to step into the role of ally, that you take on that education piece. But beyond education and listening and learning, I would say the most important thing is to remember that your role is to engage with people who share your identity, who share your privilege. And so this is, you know, not, allyship is not going and expressing solidarity to an identity group that you want to support. It is talking to your fellow identity group members and reminding them what they can be doing, taking an active role in removing those barriers that are preventing other identity groups from succeeding. So be very thoughtful in how you're approaching this and what your role is in allyship. And again, there's a dynamic, there's personal ownership, but there's also that education on the systemic piece. So not just what are my identities, what is my role, and how am I feeling, but what are the barriers that people are experiencing? So remember to balance that. And ultimately, what we're going to try to avoid is performative allyship, which is just things that make you feel good and make you look positive, and move to more action-based allyship. I didn't want to play a video on this Zoom because I know that can be kind of uncomfortable, but really recommend this awesome video by Francesca Ramsey, who also runs a blog. So highly encourage you to check out that video when you have some time. So behaviors to avoid. Some of these have overlap or present very similarly, but I think there's some uniqueness to each. And so I wanted to walk through each of them and just talk briefly about them. This is not an exhaustive list, so always check yourself and ask for feedback as you're navigating your allyship journey. But again, when you're asking for feedback, ensure that the person who you're engaging with has the space and the time and the energy to have that conversation with you. And often you should go to someone who is going to give you very candid feedback, and ideally is someone who shares your identity group. And so you're not asking a member of an identity group that might be marginalized to relive a negative experience. So we talked briefly on the last slide about performative allyship, moving away from this and moving into action-based allyship, avoiding defensiveness, being open to feedback and learning. You're probably going to screw this up. You're going to make mistakes along the way. And for chemists who are often high achievers, that can feel like failure. But recognizing that that's going to happen and continuing to solicit that feedback and learning is really important. Avoid centering yourself and doing this for your personal advancement. So I'll combine those two there in the middle. This work is not about you. It's not about your needs. It's not about making you feel good. You may feel good at the end of the day, but that can't be the reason that you're doing this work. This has to be a moral and an ethically driven action-based activity. And we have to be very careful. And I think about this a lot as a white woman. I am not here to speak for another identity group. I am not here to speak over another identity group that I may not be a part of. There are many times when I need to step back and I need to allow space for other people to share their needs and their thoughts. And so be thoughtful of making sure that you're not, again, this kind of ties into that centering yourself in personal advancement. This is not about you. This is about making space for those who need to be heard. So when I was unpacking all of this, the concepts of ally versus advocate versus sponsor kept coming up. And I was having trouble sort of untangling how each of these are different. I think realistically, being an ally, an advocate, or a sponsor are all great roles to take on, and I encourage you to explore each of them. They all require you to build trust with the identity group or the person that you're supporting, and they all require you to educate yourself. I think when we're talking about the difference between an ally versus an advocate or a sponsor, in my mind, an advocate and a sponsor is more about supporting a person, where an ally is more about supporting an identity group. But that doesn't mean that there may not be personal interactions in those activities. So that's sort of how I see the differences between them, but that's really just a personal opinion. And I think there's a lot of overlap. But I think the education piece may be a little bit different. If you're looking to sponsor someone, you probably want to better understand what are their career goals so that you're not imparting your own biased thoughts onto what you think their needs are. And all of the behaviors we just discussed are important for each of these, making sure that you're not doing it for your own self and that you're really listening and supporting the person or identity group that you want to. I also wanted to mention, I know we have another session about sponsorship later today. And so if you want to really unpack the sponsor piece of this, I encourage you to jump over and visit that. Okay, with that, I think we're actually doing okay on time. We're going to move into our first interactive activity. So if you feel comfortable, feel free to turn your camera back on at this point. We are gonna talk about your why. And I'm hoping you all are actually going to participate. Otherwise, this is not gonna be very fun. So in my mind, the foundation of allyship is really understanding why you're doing it. And you have to, I think the more personal this connection is, and the more you've unpacked it, the more successful you're going to be in taking action. And so this interactive activity is called What is Your Why? It's adapted from an activity that the Social Justice Toolbox folks have shared. So I've included the link here, and that's on those PDF slides as well. So grab a piece of paper or open a file on your desktop, and we're going to take 2 minutes to type up a couple of words, a couple of notes about one of these two prompts, or both if you're super fast and you can think through this. But I want you to spend about 2 minutes reflecting on I am an ally because, or I do allyship because. And if maybe this is early in your journey and you haven't actually started yet, it can be I'm going to, or I'm interested in being an ally. So wherever you are on your journey and this, go ahead and tailor the question to reflect that. So I'll pause here, allow you that space to reflect and write some notes. And then when we get started here in 2 more minutes, we'll share, I'll offer the opportunity to share a couple of our answers. Unmuting and sharing their why, feel free to raise your hand or just unmute, whatever would work best. We have space for probably 3 or 4 folks to share their why.
I can stop recording if you just so people can feel more comfortable and then go back to the recording again.
Sure. Awesome.
Here you go.
Thank you. So I think one of the important reasons to think about this why is that the reality is that being an ally in this space is hard work. And so you're going to, you're going to observe oppression, you're going to observe some emotionally uncomfortable things, and it may even feel physically challenging. And so having these in your mind and thinking about them, reflecting on them, is going to be an important part of the process. And so, some debrief thoughts as you kind of continue thinking about this. So again, this, that was a very short 2 minutes to try to summarize in your mind why you want to do this work. So I encourage you to kind of continue thinking through it. Think about, maybe how your motivations have evolved over time, and how some of the experiences that you've had or that you've observed may impact that why. And, in this engagement where we heard from a couple of folks, what did you learn about others' reasons? And maybe they come from other identity groups than you. And so it might have been interesting to hear their reasons why. And then the last one, I think in terms of building, a team of allies and encouraging other people from your own identity group to step up and act as allies. Thinking about your why and being able to communicate it is important to helping to explain to others why they should also participate. So that last bullet, how do you explain your understanding of allyship to others, not just the why, but also the action-based activities. And so hopefully this at least starts the process. I know, again, we're going through a lot of this very quickly today. Hopefully this starts the process of thinking about that. And will continue to be a part of your education and your evolution. All right, next activity. This one is called Proactive Allyship. It's adapted from Paul Cavell. There's a resource that's called Breaking White Silence and Stepping Up Your Work for Racial Justice. And there are a lot of racial justice tailored activities, but obviously that's one facet of who we are and our identities. And then there are lots of others, including many of the different folks you've heard from during the Predict sessions this week. So we're not just focused on racial justice. There's lots of different identity groups. Alrighty, so in this activity, what I'd like you to focus on is proactive allyship. So this is the idea that you're not having to intervene or stop an unhealthy behavior. You're being proactive and trying to promote and use your resources in a positive way. So what I'd like you to do, again, with a piece of paper, in a couple of notes in a file on your computer, think about a person or a specific identity that may be marginalized, mistreated, disrespected within your community. And that can be your school, your workplace, another organization you belong to. ACS is always a great place to reflect. And then I'm going to show you a set of resources, not an exhaustive list, but a set of resources that can be leveraged to proactively amplify the needs of this particular identity group in the situation that you've identified. So I don't want to be prescriptive. I want you to kind of think about something that's very appropriate for your experiences. But I will share this list of resources. So, a lot of times, especially as graduate students, we think we maybe don't have a lot to leverage. Being a grad student, you are not rich ever, but there are other resources besides money, even though money is always valuable. So you can always apply money, direct donations, hosting parties or something to fundraise for specific causes. But as you can see, there are many other resources that are at your disposal at any point in your career, or at any point, depending on what you're financially able to contribute. So we'll go back to the previous slide once more, just to remind everyone what the activity is. So think about a person or a specific identity group that may be marginalized, mistreated, or disrespected within your community. And think about one example of how you could leverage one of these resources to amplify their needs. And so I'll give you another 2 minutes to think through that. And then we'll allow 3 or 4 folks to share an example again. And again, the goal here is proactive. So you aren't having to immediately interrupt a bad situation. You're not having to reactively intervene. You are aware of an identity group that that's voice is not being heard, and you want to find a way to amplify it or better support their needs. All right. As you're finishing up your notes, if you feel comfortable bringing your camera back on and engaging in a discussion on this topic. The next one, everyone will get the chance to talk because we're going to move into breakout rooms. So the third activity is the intervention piece. And this one, I would say probably makes folks the most nervous. When you're talking about something proactive, you have a lot more control over the situation. You are thinking about it, deciding how you want to participate. In the intervention piece, it's often that you have to make the choice whether or not to intervene in a situation that may be very uncomfortable. And so this is often discussed as bystander intervention, where you're witnessing harassment or disrespectful behavior, and then you're choosing whether or not to intervene or disrupt that situation. Stepping up and acting as an active bystander in these situations can be really powerful. And it's, sometimes it's a matter of safety, and sometimes it's just a matter of, inclusive behavior. If someone is saying something that's not appropriate, showing disrespectful things that don't align with, for example, our ACS, core values. This is really overwhelming. It's still overwhelming to me. I feel like I need to practice this even more. And so that's part of the impetus of putting this into the, into the workshop today. So there are 5 common bystander intervention tools. They call them the 5 Ds. So this group, iHollaback, has a really excellent whole set of resources on this topic. So I encourage you to check that out as well. The important thing is, just like when we are talking about laboratory safety, or if you've ever taken, a CPR training course, the first situation is survey the scene. Am I comfortable stepping in? Is my safety, going to be a problem here? And if you ever feel that you are not going to be safe in the situation, that it's okay to not intervene. So don't let your own safety be compromised here. But the 5 Ds include distract, so derailing the incident, interrupting it, distracting the person who may be the aggressor or the attacker. Delegate, so sending someone who probably is in a position of power or leadership to go or to get someone to bring back a person of power. That does not always mean law enforcement, so be thoughtful about the implication of bringing law enforcement into the situation. Documenting the activity, and this could be recording if you feel comfortable, or just writing things down so you're prepared to explain to someone in a position of power what happened. Delaying, so it's just sticking around and waiting and making sure that the person who has been the victim has your support after the fact. And then, direct is assessing the situation again. Can you actually step in and intervene and stop the behavior by calling it out directly? And these are really at your discretion, but these are 5 tools to kind of think about how you would apply them, and then be prepared to use them in the case of being willing to step in and do a bystander intervention. So we are going to spend 5 minutes in breakout rooms and then come back together and do a quick debrief before we wrap things up. I'm going to give you 2 scenarios, and I think that I have screenshots of these that I can put in the chat, hopefully, so you can look at them. If not, try to absorb them as we're talking here. So we're going to put everybody into groups of 2, and then we're going to role play one of the scenarios described below, one person acting as the aggressor, the other as the victim, and then swapping. So the first one would be you're in a meeting with a small group of colleagues. One of your colleagues comments out loud that your other colleague is dressed very exotic and asks if they even own a pair of jeans. So we have a microaggression here. Your colleague who is dressed in ethnic apparel is visibly uncomfortable with this conversation. So feel free to use that scenario, or one that is very relevant to ACS. You're at an ACS meeting presenting your work. A person who appears to be a professor is overly zealous and somewhat aggressive towards the student who's presenting next to you. You can see that the student is visibly uncomfortable. So how do you step in and use one of the 5 Ds that we've just talked about? This can be clunky. This is really hard. And so I encourage you to practice, but don't feel badly if it doesn't go very well. So spend 2 minutes with your at the end, and we can debrief on that activity during the discussion. So, as you're navigating this and you're thinking and reflecting on your allyship journey, I think a lot of us kind of want to know, am I doing this right? So there's a great resource called Learning for Justice, and they have this kind of checklist of, am I doing it right? So make sure you're listening. Feel free to ask for help, ask for engagement. Again, don't expect anyone from a specific identity group to take the time to educate you. That's on you. Do accept criticism and feedback thoughtfully. Don't broadcast that you're here, this is about me. Do speak up when you hear biased language. Don't apologize for the actions of your identity group. That's just an awkward conversation. Step up, take action, do better. Do seek support from experienced allies within your identity group. Don't expect credit for being an ally. Do acknowledge intersectionality, that just because one person is from one identity group doesn't mean that their other identities don't impact the experience that they have. And don't selectively support one group over another. There are lots of different identity groups that all have different challenges. We all operate within the same system and experience some of the same barriers, but different identity groups, different people have very different experiences. So I mentioned these are some of my favorite resources, including the phenomenal work that Marquita Qualls does in a more one-on-one basis. So if you're looking for a seasoned DEI or strategy consultant, I highly recommend Marquita, who's a fellow chemist and ACS member. From an ACS perspective, I want to thank you for being here today. Thank the organizers of the Predict Symposium for organizing it. Please feel free to engage with the new Office of DEIR. So that QR code and that link is an opportunity to provide feedback directly to them, where they'll be triaging all the feedback and the challenges that we're experiencing and trying to work to remove those systemic barriers. There are some great resources on acs.org/DEIR, including some webinars that have been broadcast and some reading and videos. There's also a great resource in the Volunteer and National Meeting Code of Conduct policy. So if you want to have something that sets the tone for how your local section operates, how your meetings operate, I encourage you to use that slide deck and start to have this discussion about what are the expectations of how we will behave. Because I think sometimes having a more proactive conversation can be easier than waiting to be reactive. That's my email address. Happy to share any other contact details. If you want to have me on text so that you can bounce ideas off me, happy to do that. I am here to be a resource, and we can go through this journey learning together. So with that, I will say thank you for your time, and we can stop the recording